So, Mokgweetsi, I think, should we get started?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, an official warm good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar on brain-based coaching. We're incredibly excited to spend the next hour with you. And what I wanted to do is to share with you that we're going to be running this presentation today off Mentimeter. And what this does is it allows everybody to contribute, to share their thoughts, to give us reactions. So if you can please find a device, it could be on your laptop or your mobile device, and log on to www.menti.com. And at the top of the screen, it'll prompt you to enter a code, which is the code you see on the left-hand side. Mokgweetsi's also put it in the chat for you as easy access, and you can also use the QR code on the screen. Just hover your camera, it'll bring up a link, and you should be able to log in from there. What's fabulous about Menti is that you can give us reinforcement all the way through, so you can give us a heart, you can give us a thumbs up on certain screens, and there are going to be many places where we're going to ask you for comments, insights, thoughts. So it'll be fabulous if we can have as many people on the Menti as possible. Mokgweetsi will repeatedly add that link into the chat so that those who join a little bit later can share in the experience with us. So welcome everybody. I see we've got lots of hearts flying in, and it's fabulous to have conversation this way when we can't necessarily unmute with everybody in the session. So to officially introduce the team who's on the call today, it's me. My name is Kirsten Mann, and I'm one of the Connemara leadership team members. I've had 30 years in the world of corporate and the world of learning and development. I am very delighted to be introducing Karen Borain and Dr. Maria Phalime, who are colleagues of mine. They are NLI associates, both incredibly experienced executive coaches, and really bring depth of experience in terms of understanding coaching as a practice, but more specifically, our brain-based coaching. So we're going to be having a conversation today. You're going to be hearing from the three of us in different places as part of the webinar. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that Rob Pierce, our head of NLI, is on the call. He's going to be watching those comments and making sure that we respond and pick up any questions. We also have Mokgweetsi on the call, who is our head of marketing, and he's going to be really looking at the production of our session. And we have Rendani on the call, and she's looking after the tech support and making sure that everything runs smoothly. So if you have any questions or concerns or comments or thoughts, please use the chat. Please share those, and we'll be calling on the team to answer any questions that you may have. We really want this to be a conversation and not a one-way street. So welcome, and knowing that many of you have probably raced into this call from another meeting, we're actually just going to take a moment to pause, to center yourselves, to bring yourselves into the room so that you can also apply your best thinking into the conversation. So I'm going to do a breathing practice with you. Relax and sit comfortably, and then literally follow the prompts on the screen. Thank you, everybody. So hopefully that has given you a moment to just center your thoughts, take a deep breath, and allow some of your best thinking to start coming forward, because that's what we're going to be drawing on from you. So to start the conversation, we thought we'd start the conversation on brain-based coaching with the first question around what is coaching. So for those of you who are already on the Menti link, it should have prompted you to go to this next slide, and you will be able to enter in any thoughts that come to mind for you when you think about coaching. What is coaching? What is your definition of coaching? What are words that pop up for you when you think of the word coaching? And if you haven't joined the Menti link, don't worry, you can still join that now by going on to www.menti.com and entering in the code that is on the screen. And I'm going to invite Maria's voice in a moment as these thoughts come through to really reflect on what you're seeing, Maria, as individuals are sharing their insights.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Kirsten, and good afternoon, everybody. So some interesting thoughts already coming through around what coaching is. And I think it's important that we are all clear about what we mean by coaching, and then specifically we'll speak about later what we mean by brain-based coaching. So for some interesting thoughts coming through here, and things that catch my eye, for example, is around developing people, developmental conversations aimed at unlocking clients' solutions by themselves, allowing people time and space to think, to come up with answers, transformational personal growth through mindset work, facilitating aha. Very, very valuable. We'll speak about those aha moments later. What are they, and how can we create the environment that best facilitates those aha, those light bulb moments? Action-oriented, really, really important, because it's one thing to have a coaching conversation, but ultimately it's about what action are you going to be taking. So really having an action orientation and a results focus in terms of the coaching conversation. So what's coming through, Kirsten, and I'm sure Karen, you'll agree that clearly the people on the call already understand so many of the fundamentals that are key to how we in the NeuroLeadership Institute think about coaching, and in terms of the process, why coaching is so valuable. I'm just looking at other key words: shifting thinking, providing a safe space. Again, when we're talking about insights are beautiful, but they require a certain environment in which to happen. And, for us as coaches, as leaders, as managers, how do we create an environment that facilitates those aha moments? And safety is such an important consideration to think about. So those are some of the ideas that are coming through, and really encouraging to see that people have this perspective around coaching. And it would be great to then go into, how exactly do we define it, and specifically what is brain-based coaching. So thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks so much, Maria. So the NeuroLeadership Institute defines brain-based coaching as facilitating positive change by first improving thinking. And I think it speaks to so many of those thoughts and definitions that you had. It is about facilitating change, and as Maria said, about that change in behavior, not just change in thinking, but it starts with the quality of the thinking that goes into the conversation. And I'd love to call on Karen at this stage to say, well, how are coaching conversations different to other conversations? Because, we engage in conversations all day, every day. As leaders, we engage in conversations. How are conversations in the coaching realm different from other conversations? Karen, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So first of all, I love that we use the word conversation, because I think that's, where it starts. And so when we think of a conversation, it's not one way, it's got to have that, conversation is two ways. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And I saw a lot of that in the Menti, which is absolutely fantastic. So, coaching is a conversation. It is about focusing on thinking. And I think the biggest thing, the difference is, for me, the whole tell versus ask. From the moment we can speak, you can look at 2-year-olds, they're running around telling people what to do. And I think that goes into our adult life. It comes into the work environment. We love to tell people what we think, what to do. And so for me, that's the fundamental that people really struggle with coaching is this, the tell versus the ask. And I think that's where the biggest learning comes in when we look at those two. And then also where the focus is. So we saw earlier on the difference between, we saw a lot of action coming through, ability to solve their own problems. I love to see that kind of thing. And that's why coaching is so different, because it's looking at this, and Kirsten, if you got the TAPS model there, that would be fantastic to look at. And so I love these two axes because they so clearly explain what coaching is, but also what it isn't. And so we know as a coach that we don't focus on problems. We focus on that future, the solution focus, taking people forward, okay? Which means what coaching isn't is focusing on the problem and getting stuck in the problem. And that's really where we leave counseling to let people cover that. And then we know as well that with coaching that we don't tell people. That's not what we do as a coach. It's so freeing to be able to move rather into an ask, okay, and learn from others while they're learning. And so we're not telling people what their problem is, like a consultant would do, comes into our business and says, let me tell you what your problem is. Or as we find ourselves as managers doing, telling people what the problems are. And then I think the one that very often confuses people is when we think about mentoring versus coaching. So, telling people the solution. And so I loved seeing in the mentee things like, there was one comment that spoke about tapping into their own wisdom. Now, if we are telling, we can't be tapping into people's wisdoms. So training has a very clear role to play, as does mentoring. But that's about my wisdom as the trainer, facilitator, or as the mentor. And so that huge difference that when I move out of the mentor role and I move into a coaching role, I let go of being the subject matter expert. And I'm there to hear the wisdom of the person I'm having the conversation with. And someone even mentioned individuals versus groups. I might be having the conversation with a team and I'm tapping into the wisdom of the team. So for me, the biggest difference that I would explain between the mentoring and the coaching is, where do the questions come from? So when I'm a mentor, the person coming to me to have the conversation with me wants to tap into my wisdom and will come with lots of questions. But when I'm a coach, my role is to tap into their wisdom and ask them the questions. So it's the exact opposite about where do the questions come from and where does the wisdom come from. So as a coach, the questions come from me and the wisdom from the other person. And as a mentor, the questions come from the other person. And as the mentor, they're tapping into my wisdom. And I think that's a really important differentiation for us to remember. And they both have value, as does a rescuer counselor, as does a manager consultant. But if we're talking about coaching, it's about asking. And it's the biggest thing we struggle with. We do love to tell people and give advice. So it's the big thing that we need to learn. And that's why training is so important. How do we move out of the tell expert role into the wonderful freeing space of tapping into others' wisdom?
Thanks so much, Karen. And I wonder, if we've got many learning practitioners, HR practitioners, people development practitioners on the call, and they're probably quite comfortable and confident in moving into that coaching quadrant. And I'm going to ask them on the next slide to answer the question, not for themselves, but to think about many of the leaders in business that they see operating. And don't answer from yourselves, because I suspect many of you have that awareness to know that you're needing to be placing yourselves in that quadrant. But if you use the pin functionality on your Menti, it would be wonderful to see where you think many leaders tend to sit. And it's no criticism against leaders. We're all leaders in this room too. But where do you see a lot of that languaging, a lot of those conversations happening? So I see there are quite a few pins coming through already, Karen, and they seem to be definitely in that tell half.
And I'm blushing, Kirsten, because I think that, you know, as like anybody else, I spend a lot of time in the tell box. But when I'm a coach, I would never do that. Never do that. Okay. But I think our natural thing is, and we spend a lot of time, and I'm a facilitator as well, so I spend a lot of time doing that. So yeah, my cheeks are red as you talk about where you spend most of your time.
And it's interesting because if you look at where we need to be spending time as the world, as people in the world, based on everything that's happening in our world. I love the bubble that says personal, emotional, and complex. Our world is more and more gravitating towards connecting with people at a human level, understanding and empathizing with people, and there's huge complexity. So those words stand out for me in terms of how coaching is even more so relevant based on some of the complexity that we navigate as individuals and as business leaders. And it's interesting, there's quite a spread on the screen here, but you can see where the bubbles have numbers, you know, 6 people in that middle bubble. If you were to split all them out, many people are placing, you know, the conversations that we hear often in that lower half and on asking about the problem. Interesting. And I mean, maybe, you know, again, talking about why coaching is so current in our current conditions and our current world. I've alluded to that a little bit already around there are just so many challenges, so many changes. The world is so fast paced. You know, some of these images on the screen might speak to you about some of the challenges you're experiencing and facing on a daily basis. From a commercial perspective, impact on industry, you know, artificial intelligence. COVID vaccines might be old news for some, but there are new vaccines coming through all the time and new potential pandemics. You have individuals who are burnt out as a result of long COVID. People are exhausted due to all the stresses. And in this context, and I see people sort of placing themselves in different places, in this context, we need to be very clear about how we are creating space for people to solve problems for themselves, how we're creating place for people to think for themselves, how we are able to let go and empower others to step into places. And I don't know if you know, Maria or Karen, if you want to comment on how coaching helps us navigate and becomes even more relevant in this current context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kirsten. I mean, I think and just kind of maybe piggybacking off what Karen said around, you know, it's as a coach, well, when you are in a coaching conversation, it frees you up. And, you know, in this world of complexity, there is only, it's unreasonable to expect managers to have all the answers. Managers and leaders don't. So it's really about how can I help you in this coaching conversation? How can I help you in terms of improving your thinking so that you are able to better navigate the complexity that you are faced with? So I think, you know, to the nature of our world and the nature of the complexity that we face and the hybrid working environment as well means that, you know, manager being in charge, kind of overseeing every single thing is no longer an option. So it's really, really important now to empower people to think for themselves, to arrive at their own solutions, and to really take that forward so that they're better able to navigate the complexity. So yeah, thank you.
Maria. And you know, Karen, I'm just wondering, you know, people talk about coaching and they talk about coaching and many people know what coaching practices are, but maybe you have some thoughts around brain-based coaching specifically, and how brain-based coaching potentially differs from other coaching practices, and again, how it feeds into this very challenging world of work that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. Because just building on what Maria said, I think that one of the biggest things with coaching is that whilst we can look at the fact that we might have all been through an experience, for example, lockdown, it's how we in our context deal with it. So maybe what's hard for me is not hard for you, and vice versa. And so I think that, one of the benefits of applying coaching is that we're tapping into people's own wisdom, their own experience, and therefore they will solve their problems in terms of being able to use their own context, because it's so different. Okay, so I think that that's really important when we look at applying coaching, that we are ensuring that our experience of something could be very different to someone else. I might hate gym, you might love it. So how do we get fit? Not necessarily the same. So when we look at brain-based, obviously it is based on the brain and the NeuroLeadership Institute. And so it is based on the science of the brain, which is fantastic. And I know that for all of us who've been trained in it, it's fascinating, and especially because it's a growing subject. So the NeuroLeadership Institute is constantly looking and researching and bringing more information. So this art of coaching, although it's based on science, it is growing. And that, especially in the work environment, I find in my experience that having a very structured process that people can follow is really, really important. So maybe, if I'm doing coaching outside of the work environment, there can be a little bit more free flow, but generally we want those results. We want to see results that come out of coaching, and corporates and organizations want to see results. And in order to get those results, one needs to have a focused, clearly articulated, as it says, and a structure that drives from where people are now in the shortest possible way to get them where we want, and where, more importantly, they want to be. So it really does have a way of measuring, and I know for myself as a coach, I measure the outcomes of my clients in agreement. They're in effect measuring themselves in terms of what they have achieved by the end of a coaching series. And that gives me confidence as a coach to go into organizations and talk coaching, because there is a measurable result and we can literally measure it. And my clients would be offered to measure themselves on a scale that suits them, and we can get that absolute clear outcome that we would be looking for. So in the corporate environment, as coaches, it gives real data that corporates can work with as well as the most important person in this conversation, who is the client, that they can have a sense of real outcomes.
And that's amazing. And maybe I'm very mindful of the fact that we opened up the option for questions and comments on the chat. So before we move on, perhaps to call in Rob or Moheti or Rendani, are there any questions on the chat that we can address or speak to, or any comments?
There's no comments yet.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Moheti. And maybe just as you're thinking, if there are questions that pop up for you, please feel free to add them, and we'll pause again in a moment to address any questions that you may have. Thanks so much, Karen. So I thought maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about, some of the elements that are normally addressed when we speak about brain-based coaching and developing skills around brain-based coaching.
I'm smiling because you say a little bit. I'm not sure I can do a little bit. Okay. So yeah, the program starts, and there was a really good question in the box, which really talks to this as well, around, is it different to traditional? So it has all the elements of what we would call traditional, because we're using, in particular, the International Coaching Federation's competencies. So that's kind of your traditional coachings. Those are pulled through into the program. But these are the specifics for brain-based that, you learn about the brain. And I must say, as a facilitator, I could, run that for a whole day, although obviously as part of the program it isn't. But the insights are so interesting that we learn about how the brain works and how the brain works at work, as well as obviously in our personal life. And because it's a conversation, it's important that the communication is pulled in, because you need to communicate in a way that's going to get the best results for that person. And so some of you in the mentee earlier on spoke about a safe space and empowering. And so learning communication skills that are empowering are really, that builds on that quality of the conversation you're going to have. And then, of course, that, and Maria spoke about it earlier, those aha moments, those moments of learning, which are so incredibly key. That's a big part of the learning here. I'm just going to sort of run through them, Kirsten, if that's okay. Yeah, and just because, one has to bring in the emotional intelligence side. How do we, both as coaches, as well as for our clients, regulate emotions? And that's not mean dampening them down and pushing them under, because that's not going to help anybody. But learning to regulate emotions for ourselves as coaches, because obviously we're dealing with different situations all the time, but also how do we also work with our clients in order for them to build that and build that emotional intelligence. And then long term, when you go back to looking at that, the definition that you pulled up earlier, it's about those long-term habits, the positive habits that come through the thinking. And so we really are focusing on thinking while we move people to action to get them to build new and positive habits. It's about the thinking, and that's a big change for us as well. When we are dealing with people that we work with, very often we're dealing with the do. As a manager, we give instructions for people to do. We don't spend a lot of time delving into the thinking, which is what you start to do now. And then there comes the structure. A 12-session coaching engagement is the structure. And then all these tools, tools and models. I remember someone telling me once on a brain-based coaching that there are more models than in a modeling agency. But they're wonderful because they're based on right at the top, those key insights about the brain, the first point. And ultimately, it's about this ability for your coachee, your client, to grow. But I think that as a coach, I started coaching in 2004, and there's not a day that I've regretted it. It's added so much value to my life, as a leader in an organization, as a coach. And obviously that then is that same self-awareness that our coachees walk away with. So hugely beneficial for me as an individual, as a coach. Every time I have a conversation and I do a coaching session, or I run a brain-based coaching, I just walk away having taken so much richness out of that, the program and the coaching.
And that's amazing. And I know one of the models we were hoping to share with everybody today is the one that's on the screen here. And I think it's one of the sort of insights that I had when I was exposed to brain-based coaching that just changed my view of coaching conversations. I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit around the principles that sit here.
Yeah, which talks exactly to that thinking, So we look at the bottom, the drama is all about the emotions, And we know from studying the brain that when our emotions, it's like a valve, when our emotions are open and running high, that valve is open, very hard to think. And I'm sure all of you had that experience, when you're really angry, you don't think, or even when you're really happy, we sometimes just do things in the moment. And so our thinking and our emotions are on this valve, like a seesaw, when one's up, the other's down. And so that taps into it. And generally we do talk about problems. You're going to meetings and we get an agenda which is a list of problems that we go and we focus on. And so often we walk out of a meeting with, that little molehill we started with is now this huge big mountain that we've got. So, and we know, again, when we learn about the brain, sort of how much the brain can deal with in terms of detail. And that's why you'll see Kirsten gives you a break every now and again from my talking, so that, it's just too much detail. How do we cope with that? So those are some of the things that get in the way of learning and really changing and facilitating this growth through thinking. And so as coaches, what we want to do is put people into this positive space where they've got this vision, and we know that what changes a dream into a reality is having clear goals and a proper vision of something with a good plan. And having done some work with some of NLI's clients around strategy. So often you go into a strategy session and everybody's at the bottom. There's so much detail, and they're trying to get so much out as a team, a leadership team. And then the problems start raising themselves, and then emotions start coming through. And then you introduce this and you say, boom, let us focus on the vision. Let's not look at where we are now, but rather look at where you want to be. I mentioned earlier on when we looked at the TAPS model, the preferred future. What is your preferred future? Your vision. And we can do that with leadership teams, we can do that with individuals. And that's such a big change in thinking. But then, of course, as a coach, the big thing is we help people get there. It's not that they've got this vision and then we're like, okay, I'm out of here. The big part then comes into the planning and to putting things in place that really help them to move towards that preferred future that I said earlier on. We can measure at the end. How close are we to it in terms of the structure? So I love this model. I mean, you introduce this and boom, into a conversation. The whole conversation changes.
I don't know if we want to add any thoughts to that, because I'm going to ask you to maybe embellish a little bit on what is an insight. We've spoken about insight a few times in the conversation, but before I move to that, Maria, any sort of thoughts you want to add in terms of choosing our focus in brain-based coaching?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, as Karen said, it's when you start shifting to vision and planning, you can almost feel the energy in the room shifting, right? Because when you're focusing on the problem or you're getting kind of overwhelmed by the detail, the energy tends to get quite heavy, and we can almost end up in this downward spiral, right? Whereas focusing on the vision starts to lift us up. You can see people, almost sitting up straight. They can start to see what's possible, and then you help them to kind of plot the way towards what's possible. So really, it's a visceral experience of a shift in that energy in the room.
Thank you. So tell us about insight. I mean, we've been speaking about what is an insight. It's a word that we use quite often. And love to hear from you a little bit more of a definition around insight. And then I'm going to call on our participants today to have a bit of fun with us around insight.
Yes, yeah. So, so an insight, it's about learning. That's what it is. Okay, so an insight is when we have that, that thing that's on the tip of your tongue and you just can't get it out, and boom, it comes to you. Maybe tomorrow, okay, but it comes to you. And that's what an insight is. So it's that, and as it says there, it's that solution which comes from deep in your brain that's suddenly like, aha, whoa, and you've got it, okay, whenever it might happen. As it says, it emerges quickly. It doesn't mean it might be quick in the moment. Sometimes it comes later, and that's just the joy of this learning that our clients are going through. So it's this idea that comes, a solution, a thought that comes so quickly when it does happen, but it's come from the deepness of your brain, where your brain suddenly had a chance to make some connections. And so suddenly it sees a way through. And it could come through the coach asking great questions. It could come from the coach being silent, but holding that safe space we spoke about earlier on, that allows that person's brain to make those new connections, and boom, they can have that moment that comes to them. So yeah, and it's about learning. That's the most important thing.
Wonderful. So everybody online with us, and remember that Mentee, we're going to ask you to have a look at a couple more ideas here, but feel what happens when you move from this image where you've seen a particular thing, and I don't know what you see. I don't know if everybody sees a face looking slightly sideways, and suddenly when you change a perspective, you see something quite different. And to Karen's point, that sort of, oh, you know, that, oh, I see something different now. I see something that I didn't see before, making a connection that wasn't there before. And I'm now going to ask you to have your chat button at the ready. And I'm going to ask you on the next slide to say, if you could add one word to each of these standalone words to make a completely different set of words, what would it be? So what one word would link these three different words? And I'm going to ask the team monitoring the chat, as soon as you have a word in the chat, let us know what's coming through. So we're looking for fastest fingers on the chat right now.
We've got fire.
Ah, we've got fire. We have some fired up brains this morning.
Wow.
100%. That didn't take long at all, right? So immediately you see something different. And sometimes people, as you said, have that insight very quickly. Sometimes it might take a little longer. Let's try this one. And again, fastest fingers. What one word would link these three words? This group is unstoppable today, 100%. So as soon as we've got it on the chat, everyone will see that. Goldfish, gold mine, and gold rush. And often it's so interesting when, you know, we've run this program in the room before, and you watch people having a look at this exercise. You can write it up on a flip chart. You actually will see a change in people's faces as they see the solution. Even before they've said it, it's that, aha, you know, that eureka moment. And it's incredible what's happening in the brain when that eureka moment is actually reached. And maybe just to end off this piece around insights, I'd like to share with you a little short clip around what Oprah says about these aha moments. So hopefully the sound will come through and you'll hear it in a moment.
How does it feel to have a phrase in the dictionary named after your phrase, aha moments? That's crazy.
You know what the wonderful thing about aha, though, is? I can't even remember how early on during the show days I started saying it. But this is the thing about an aha moment, and I love having them where you think you've never thought of it that way before.
Right.
But an aha really is, think about this, you can't have an aha unless you already knew it. So the aha is a remembering of what you already knew, articulated in a way to resonate with your own truth. So the aha isn't somebody teaching you something. The aha is somebody helping you to remember.
That's an aha moment for me.
That's an aha. Think about that. That's what it is.
So I think this is probably a really good place to pause and just see if there are any new questions that have come up or comments or thoughts that people had, and also give everyone a moment to comment before I hand back to Maria to talk a little bit more about where we often have insights and what aids insight. But maybe Rob, Mkheti, Renjani, are there any comments or questions?
Yes, there's a question from Carlos. He says that, how would you address a coach that is negative towards questions, as well as always being negative in the work environment?
Address a coach who's specifically negative, sure.
Yes. That's a question to the panelist.
Karen, Maria.
If I can have a shot at it. I mean, I think part of the beauty of a brain-based approach is that it shows us what science says about how we approach our challenges in the workplace. And I say this because a lot of the time with coaching clients, someone is having a difficult time, they're feeling low or whatever, and it's often understanding, even just the understanding around the science of better thinking, the science of better performance, that helps to shift how someone sees their particular challenge. So for that coach, I mean, it's very seldom that the coach would have a negative attitude, but it's about kind of what are the results that you want to produce. And this is what the brain science says about the quality of your thinking when you are in that negative state. So we want to be looking at what is it necessary in order to shift your state into a state that is more conducive to better thinking, to those insights, those aha moments. So, I mean, that would be the approach. This is what the science, and often with clients, just having that knowledge of how our brains work can really be the key that unlocks someone's approach, someone's attitude, that then has them say, oh, okay, I see that I'm not doing myself any favors here. What do I need to do in terms of shifting my state in order to facilitate better thinking and therefore better results? So that's my view. I don't know, Karen, what thoughts around that?
Okay, so it's an interesting question, and I think when you're facilitating these programs, one might see it at the beginning of a program that someone is negative. In my experience, by the end, through experience, okay, so experience is important. I need to experience two things. One, being a coach, and what happens when I ask questions, and then I need to experience the other. What is it like to be coached? And so that I can be on the giving and the receiving side of questions. And I think that becomes incredibly powerful, because we ask people for advice, but we generally don't like it when we get it. So when I have the experience to be coached, that then also will, in my opinion, in my experience of working with people. So you're running a 3-day brain-based coaching, and you've got the person on the first day who's no, maybe even the second day, no. And then suddenly they have this great experience of finding a solution to a long-term challenge. And that's their aha moment of the power of questions. So if I had a coach who was really negative, I would ensure that they have a great experience of being coached, and encourage them and mentor them to coach as well, to have that experience.
And I'm just wondering, Karen, is it the coach who's negative? Is it the coachee who's negative? And I think many of your examples and your illustration here would address in either direction. Obviously having a coach leading from a negative perspective is a dilemma, but I think the principles you've shared would apply to both, very much so. I wanted to just comment on another question I see on the chat is how can we check ourselves for bias, especially when listening in a coaching session? And I think that's it's a big question, but maybe you've got a way of addressing that one.
Yeah, so I think that, so one of the powerful things to learn as a coach is, the whole concept of whose problem is it anyway? So, I'm going to be allowing my coachee the space to own their problem. And so I come from a base of curiosity. And so if I'm feeling a bias, I must then ask questions to encourage thinking from the other person, so that they are applying their thinking to their situation. So if I'm coming from a basis of curiosity, not judgment, and therefore my questions are to the benefit of the coachee, then, one would look at that my bias comes out of it, because I should not be judging the client. I had to go back to the gym example. Someone comes and they want to get fit. I'm just like, I could just be like, well, go to gym. Okay. But, we're complex as people. And therefore, if that's my bias, I have to let that go, to rather ask questions like, well, I've heard you don't like gym. What do you like? What would be preferable for you? What has worked for you before? Those questions, which come from a base of curiosity, not a base of, I don't know, just go to gym. Okay. And I don't go to gym, just in case anybody's interested. Okay. But, coming from a base of curiosity rather than judgment is what keeps my bias out of it.
Thank you so much, Karen. And Maria, looking at what's coming up on the screen here, people have insights in the most wonderful places. Lots of people sort of in that restful space, in the shower, listening to music. There's one dot on the car, I must say, that's one of the places. It's not the only, but one of the reasons I've really enjoyed traveling to work again is that time in the car to reflect. But I mean, having insights is one thing, Maria. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the power of insights and where you go?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's coming through, what's common about where people have put their dots is that, and I saw there were comments in the chat as well, jogging and music and in silence, is that these environments are generally quiet, where our focus is internal, so we're internally focused. We're generally in a good mood or in a slightly good mood, and we're not focusing necessarily directly on the problem. And, it's this environment that we want to try and replicate when we are in a coaching conversation with somebody. Right. So in a coaching conversation, how can I help to create a container that facilitates the thinking? That you said it earlier on, Karen, just sometimes there are moments when we need to learn to just say nothing, right? Be silent, allow the thinking to happen, creating safety, really ensuring that the person is in a slightly relatively positive frame of mind, and really asking the kinds of questions that then get the person thinking in new ways. And we can often see it, and you alluded to it earlier on, Kirsten, and in those exercises, I imagine people felt it, right? So when you are faced with a puzzle, right, as we were in the slides, you can feel that kind of, oh, what is this? What's connecting these three words? There's something, and it's there, and you feel like maybe I have it, and it feels uncomfortable, and it feels like a lot of work. And what's actually happening in the brain is that the brain is working hard, right? The data is all there, but the brain is working hard to try and combine the data in new ways. And that then shows up on the face as well. You can see it, right? So someone will be kind of grappling with, oh, I'm having a challenge, I'm struggling with this thing, or this client is, I'm not making headway here. You can see perhaps the distress, the stuckness that shows up on their face. And then you engage in that coaching conversation, and they then start thinking. And you can see when they start thinking that they often look upwards and to the side, right? And at this time, they very seldom say something, right? But a lot, even though they're not saying a lot's happening upstairs. They are thinking. The brain is busy trying to find, sorting through the data that's already there and trying to find that that match, that new pattern. And then the insight happens and boom, you feel it. You know, you almost like that lift, the face goes, ah. And that moment when you're coaching somebody is that moment where you want to harness. Well, first of all, you see that this person has arrived at that insight because you can see it on their face. And what happens in the brain is we can always think of it as dots joining. So the brain is initially in that reflection phase. The brain is sorting through the available data, trying to find a pattern that makes sense for the problem at hand. And then what happens is that when those dots join, that's the moment of insight. And the energy that was invested in that reflection is then released. And you can feel it, you know, you feel that lift, you feel that energetic boost. And this moment of insight is so valuable when you're coaching someone, because this is the moment where you then have the opportunity to harness this extra energy that has come through. And it's so important that you don't, I mean, it feels good, you know, and when you're coaching as well, it also feels good to realize that someone has arrived at an insight. But what is absolutely critical in this chain is to then harness the energy of that insight. What are you going to do? What's the next step to take? Who do you need to speak to? You know, really move them to committing to action, because it's that action that is then the game changer. Another thing with insight is because it is internally generated, you came up with it for yourself, it's there, you know, it stays with you, right? And what the research has actually shown that, you know, weeks down the line, you will still remember that insight. Whereas if I tell you, if I'm your manager and I tell you something, weeks down the line, chances of you remembering are slim. And then months down the line, they are really nearing zero. Whereas when you came to the insight for yourself, it stays with you forever. And then, of course, moving into action. And it's so important that when we are working with people in a coaching conversation, that we then move forward with action and then follow up. So you're committing to XYZ action. Great. Let's speak again in 3 days' time, a week's time, to see how far you've got, and to see, you know, where we move on from there. And also, because the person has got that insight, in the future, right, they'll encounter a similar problem, right? They have acquired an approach that enables them to then deal with that challenge for themselves. So in facilitating that insight, you're actually not just helping them to deal with one issue, one challenge, you're actually facilitating behavior change, because they'll be equipped and empowered to address future challenges through that new and improved thinking. So that's really the value of this brain-based coaching, facilitating insights that enable action, and then ultimately through repeated action, building those positive habits, and ultimately leading to behavior change. Yeah, so that's really what these 4 phases of insight are all about. The most important of those, of course, being action, which we want to move towards. And perhaps maybe if I can hand back to you, Kirsten, because I mean, I suspect that people are already quite enthused, and certainly what's coming through in the chat, people are excited about what they're hearing. How might they take this conversation forward?
Fantastic, Maria. Thanks so much. So yes, we've shared a bit of a snippet and insight into the world of brain-based coaching. I think Karen mentioned earlier, there's more models than a model show. We have so much rich data, so many rich perspectives around brain-based coaching. And what we wanted to share with you to close out is that we do offer brain-based coaching development in many different ways, either through something like our Brain-Based Conversation Skills Program, our Brain-Based Coaching Certificate, which are all programs run by the NeuroLeadership Institute. We also work with clients, and this could be for individuals. If you are a practitioner who's wanting to become accredited, as you see, it is ICF accredited, you can step into one of those programs from an individual perspective. But we also work with organizations often, where we work with leaders in organizations around brain-based conversations. There's various iterations of that. We also have sort of a leader as coach, performance leadership program. But what's incredibly exciting is how practical and how application-based these programs are, that individuals walk away really understanding and able to apply brain-based coaching in practice. These particular programs that you have on the screen here are really aimed for leaders, business leaders, managers, but also individuals who are in the world of human resources and learning and development, coaching professionals who are wanting to grow their skills into brain-based coaching, and individuals who are interested in stepping into the world of coaching maybe for the first time. So we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions on our programs, if you'd like to learn more. We've got a link coming up in a moment. We've got a number of intakes that are coming up quite soon. And if you question the sort of relationship between these two programs, the Brain-Based Coaching Certificate starts with the same content as the Brain-Based Conversation Skills program, but it expands it beyond that into additional elements of work. But we have a number of programs starting soon. We have got all of these dates available to you on our website, and you can learn some more about that. So you're welcome to scan the QR code on your screen to learn more. I know that Borain has also put a link in the chat if you'd like to reach out and ask any additional questions about the program. He's put a link in the chat. But in the last closing minutes, we'd love to just pause and hear whether there are any other final questions, comments, or things we can clarify. I did notice on Maria and Karen, I noticed on the chat, I always have a tendency to look sideways when I'm thinking, and I wondered whether I was normal or not. You're normal. You're normal. 100%, 100%. Any other final thoughts or questions or closing comments from the team? I know there have been questions around recordings. We will be sharing a recording with everybody who participated. We will potentially be sharing some additional snippets on LinkedIn going forward. But anyone on this call, you're welcome to reach out via the chat, via the link that we shared. And I think if there's nothing further from my side, just a huge thank you for giving us a precious hour of your time. It's been wonderful to interact with you, and to Maria and Karen, thank you so much for spending this time with us. To Mkheti and to Rendani and to Rob, thank you for all the support. And yes, we wish you a fabulous rest of your Thursday afternoon.